Hey folks, welcome to the channel. Today we're going to be putting a sheath on the Loki dagger. What we're going to use is this beautiful Stingray skin. So the way I'm going to construct this sheath is with a two-part construction. So you'll see this is 8 to 9 ounce leather. It's a little thicker. That's going to be the backing. I'm just using this as a sample, but that's going to be the backing. Then there'll be a kind of a strip around the outside. That's called the welt. And then you can see this one's quite a bit thinner. So there's going to be a layer of this with the Stingray skin, and then just a thin layer around it, which is going to be kind of an edging, and then it's like there'll be a window with the Stingray skin below it. And the great part about these Stingray skins is they usually have this white section here. So that's going to show up kind of right there. So it'll look pretty cool. Okay, let's get started. So I've got my leather pulled out here. I'm going to draw it on. But first let's talk about the construction of exactly the shape of this. So the bottom is just going to follow the contour of the blade. So that's going to be pretty simple, and I'll typically draw about a 1/2 inch from the blade because that'll give you room for your welt up to the guard. And then for this one, I'm going to do a belt loop, but I'm going to just take the leather and fold it down, so it will be the rough side of the leather. But that's fine because this sheath is going to be jet black, and I think that's actually going to look pretty cool. So what I like to do is use one of these guys, because you can just set it to the width here. Hold down your blade and simply okay, you obviously can't do these cutouts in the leather or else it'll stick, so I'm just going to put a little mark on the widest part here and here. And then one tip is I always pull the blade back a bit, because the last thing you want it to do is hit the bottom and there be a gap here. So I always put it up so that there's a little extra leather up here, because you want it to hit that top leather first.
Now I'm starting to cut out the pattern in the leather, and really this is my least favorite part of this whole process. Just something about the finicky nature of cutting leather, it doesn't turn me on. Here I'm using a cheap X-Acto knife, scalpel kind of thing, and that's probably one of the reasons I don't like it, because this blade gets dull really fast. Now I'm fitting the welts, and that's the piece of leather that goes between the outer pieces of leather to make sure that you don't cut your stitches when you put the knife in the sheath. Now I'm cutting the 4-ounce leather, and this is what the top of the sheath is going to be made from. Here I'm cutting the little window in the very top piece of leather, and that's what you're going to see the Stingray skin through. I thought I'd show you this because I'm sure most of you have never seen Stingray skin. It's like tiny little beads stuck to a backing of leather. It's one of the coolest materials I've ever used. You need really strong shears to cut this stuff. It is like cutting little plastic beads over and over again. It's really tough stuff. I'm applying some contact cement to the back of the Stingray skin, and that'll stick it to the leather and make sure it doesn't come up. Now I'm gluing the top window leather onto the leather that has the Stingray skin. It's about here when I figure out that I forgot to dye the leather. The contact cement can sometimes interfere with the dye, so you definitely want to dye the leather before you glue it together. I wanted to make sure this was clamped nice and evenly and tightly, so I figured I would put it between two metal plates and just put clamps on it, and that way I'd get a nice even compression on it.
So here it is after taking it out from pressing between the two plates. It looks like it came out really, really nice. So now I'm just going to finish staining it, and we'll be ready to do the rest. So I've also bent this over. I just wet it here, and I'm going to stitch that there, but before I do that, of course, I have to dye it. So now I'm going to burnish the edges of this with this little tool because this is going to get folded over and I won't be able to do it after this.
Now it's time to glue in the welts. Just like before, a lot of contact cement and then between some clamps.
Okay, it's time to glue down the belt loop. What I normally do is, especially if it's this side, I'm just going to score it up a little bit with this. So we're going to stitch this. So in order to know where our stitches go, we're going to use this stitch marker. We're not going all the way through. We're just really giving it a little tap here, a little harder. Okay, now we're going to go to the drill press and drill through those.
This is a 16th inch drill bit, and you also need a backer behind your leather or it will cause your holes to be off kilter.
So here's the thread. It's a wax thread. I'm going to be using black. The good rule of thumb is to use about 6 to 8 times as much as you're stitching, and this is only through 2 layers, so it's not too bad. So to thread these needles, the easiest way is to thread it in and then take this, put it through the center of the thread, and then pull the whole thing like that. So what we're going to be doing is called a saddle stitch. I'm going to just put this through the hole, pull. Okay, so they're even, and go to my next hole, go through, and then go through that same hole. Sometimes that, yeah, there we go. And then when you pull them tight, it'll just tighten and cinch on the next one, and then you just keep going. So I've just snipped the inside two because those you won't see. So what I'm going to do now is just put a little heat on those, and then you just kind of tap them, and that forms a little barrier there so that they don't pull through. The last thing I like to do is to take one of these and just go over the stitches. It just kind of pushes them in and makes them look nice. So here it is after a couple hours of just sitting with the clamps on it. We are ready to go to the next step, which is to trim off the edges, and we'll just do that on the grinder.
What I'm doing here is using an edging tool and just taking off the sharp corner on the leather. This helps when you burnish the leather to make it give it a rounded edge. And now a grooving tool, and this gives me my stitch line because I want the stitches to be embedded a little bit in the leather and not raised up too much. And now more stitching. Believe it or not, stitching the sheath is actually one of my favorite parts. I find it really therapeutic for some reason.
So I hit the sheath with a little bit of this carnauba cream, which is kind of like a waxy, so you see it has some white buildup, but that's good. Now I'm going to take it to the buffer and give it a little buffing, and we should be pretty much done. A little bit of coat of oil. So there it is, folks. There is the final sheath. It came out pretty nice. Let's try it out. Nice. I love this diamond, and just the feel of the Stingray skin is very cool. Thanks for checking out this build, folks. We'll see you on the next one.